7 people are gone. Over 100,000 homes are sitting in complete darkness right now. And here's the part that should really bother you. Neither one of these disasters is actually finished yet. Let me back up, because this weekend America got hit twice. 2 completely different parts of the country, 4,000 miles apart, both fighting for their lives against water at the exact same time. And if you only watch mainstream news, chances are you only caught one of these stories. So let's fix that. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what happened in both places, why it got this bad, and why the people running the emergency response are telling you this thing is far from over. Let's start in Indiana, because what happened there over the last week genuinely broke a number nobody thought could be broken. It started on August 11th. A line of severe storms rolled into the state, and over the following 4 days, it just would not stop dumping water. We're not talking about a normal summer storm here. Some parts of Indiana got hit with more than 11 inches of rain in roughly 48 hours. The worst of it landed on Newcastle, Indiana, where the official rain gauge measured 11.43 inches. Greensburg wasn't far behind, picking up more than 7 inches on its own. Now on paper, that already sounds bad. But here's what actually made it a catastrophe, and it's something most people never think about: the ground itself. Before this storm even arrived, Indiana had already been soaked by round after round of heavy rain in the days prior. So by the time this new system rolled in, the soil wasn't just wet, it was full, completely saturated. There was nowhere left for that water to go. And this is the piece of science that explains everything that happened next. When soil is saturated like that, it basically stops absorbing rain. Instead of soaking in, almost all of it runs straight off into the nearest creek, stream, or river. So those 11 inches that fell on Indiana didn't behave like 11 inches of rainfall spread out and absorbed. They behaved like 11 inches of water poured directly into the river channel. Every drop, straight into the current, with nowhere else to go. And the river that took the brunt of it was the White River. The flooding hammered the stretch running from Hamilton County down through the northern edge of Indianapolis. Multiple rivers across the state hit major flood warnings all at once. In the Ravenswood neighborhood of Indianapolis, drone footage showed entire streets swallowed by water. Cars buried up to their rooftops, floodwater lapping at front doors, and residents literally paddling kayaks and rowboats through what used to be their own street. That's not a flood in the normal sense. That's a new lake appearing overnight in the middle of a major American city. But then the river did something that had never happened before in recorded history. At the gauge station in Anderson, the White River crested at just under 25 feet, 24.93 feet to be exact. The old record at that same location was 23.66 feet, and that record wasn't recent. It had stood since 1913. That's 113 years. 2 world wars happened since that record was set. The interstate highway system was built after it. Humans landed on the moon after it. Every single flood that came through Indiana over the following century never touched that mark, until this past Friday. This new flood beat the old one by 1 1/3 feet. And upstream in Noblesville, about 15 miles north of Indianapolis, the river blew past its own century-old record too, forecast to crest around 24.5 feet against an old mark of just under 24. Here's what makes this genuinely wild, and not just a scary headline. The 1913 flood, the one that held the record for over 100 years, wasn't even a summer storm. It happened in spring, and it was fed by melting snow combined with heavy rainfall landing on ground that was still partly frozen. Picture that combination. Snowmelt with nowhere to go, plus a massive rainstorm on top of it, hitting frozen soil that can't absorb a drop. That's about as extreme a setup as you can get for a flood. That storm alone killed somewhere between 1 and 200 people across Indiana, left 250,000 people homeless across the wider Midwest, and became the second deadliest flood in the history of the United States. For over 100 years, that flood was the benchmark everything else got measured against. And this year, a summer thunderstorm system, no snowmelt, no frozen ground, none of those extra factors. They beat it using rain alone. Think about that for a second. August is supposed to be the safest time of year for a river, hydrologically speaking. Warm ground, no snowpack sitting around waiting to melt. Every advantage that made the 1913 flood so severe was missing this time. And a stretch of summer storms just walked straight past that record anyway. That should stop you in your tracks. Because so much of the infrastructure in that region, the flood maps, the insurance calculations, the height of the levees, the size of the drainage pipes, the roads that planners assumed would flood only in a true worst-case scenario, all of it was built using 1913 as the ceiling. And on Friday, that ceiling just got smashed through. So what actually caused this? It's not some exotic, once-in-a-generation weather event. It comes down to something meteorologists call a stall. A weather front moved across the Midwest and then simply stopped advancing. Warm, humid air pushing up from the Gulf of Mexico ran into cooler air sitting to the north, and the two basically fought each other to a standstill. Meanwhile, a high-pressure system parked over the Gulf acted like a conveyor belt, continuously pumping moisture-loaded air northward, straight into that stalled boundary. Every little disturbance moving along the jet stream fired off a fresh batch of thunderstorms right along that same line. And because those storms kept tracking in the same direction, crossing the exact same counties over and over, meteorologists call it training, like train cars running down the same track one after another, each one dumping its full load of rain onto ground, the last one just soaked. Hawaii County's mayor, Kimo Alama, confirmed publicly that multiple occupied homes may have been completely swept off their foundations in certain areas on the Big Island. He described what looked like a river tearing through neighborhoods, washing away everything in its path. Hawaii County Civil Defense Office launched a joint search and rescue mission, pulling in county resources, the Hawaii National Guard, and the United States Coast Guard, all trying to reach residents who had called 911 for help and then gone silent because flooding and fallen boulders had cut off the roads and knocked out cell service. Imagine that. Search and rescue teams working in total darkness and rushing water, navigating around boulders blocking roads, trying to reach people who called for help and then simply disappeared from contact. One person was killed in a storm-related car crash on the Big Island. More than 100 homes were either damaged or completely destroyed on that island alone. 6 bridges were destroyed or nearly destroyed in the Kau region. Hawaii's governor, Josh Green, described what he saw in parts of the South as utter devastation. Overnight into Sunday, a section of a major highway actually collapsed, cutting off access to an area that's home to one of the region's only hospitals. Where a road used to be, there's now a waterfall. Hawaiian Airlines had to cancel 52 flights. Across the state, close to 190 flights were either canceled or delayed in a single day. Every school, court, and government office across the state shut down on Monday. But the power situation is really where you start to understand just how uniquely brutal this is for an island chain. By Saturday night, more than 88,000 Hawaiian Electric customers had lost power. By Sunday morning, that number had jumped past 178,000. By Monday morning, it had settled around 117,000 customers, still sitting in the dark across 3 separate islands, with about 41,000 of those on the Big Island alone. And the utility company came right out and said some of these outages could last for months. Not days, months. Here's why that's not an exaggeration. Hawaii's islands are not connected to each other by a shared power grid, and they're definitely not connected to anything on the mainland. When a storm knocks out power lines somewhere on the continental United States, utility companies can call in mutual aid, and convoys of repair trucks show up from neighboring states within hours or days. That entire system simply doesn't exist for Hawaii. There's no highway connecting these islands to anywhere. Every repair crew, every replacement power pole, every transformer, every spool of cable has to already be on the island, or it has to arrive by boat or by plane. Hawaiian Electric had to request help from partner utilities on the mainland, and roughly 100 crew members were expected to land by Tuesday just to begin repair work on Wednesday. They had to be flown in. On top of that, 2 of the Big Island's largest independent power sources, a geothermal plant and an energy partnership, both got knocked offline by storm damage. Wind power providers went dark too. A 42-mile stretch of transmission line along the Hamakua coast needed a full damage assessment after fallen trees took down multiple poles and support structures along the corridor. That's not a scattered local outage. That's the actual backbone of the grid failing. And on an island, a backbone failure doesn't get patched by borrowing trucks from 2 states over. And the ripple effects from a long power outage on an island stack up fast. Losing power means losing the electric pumps that keep the water system running, which is exactly why the Department of Water Supply told every customer to limit their water use strictly to drinking, cooking, and basic hygiene. Losing power for an extended period means losing refrigeration for food and for medication, including things like insulin that can't handle sitting in the heat. It knocks out the cell towers people rely on to call for help, and the same towers rescue teams use to locate them. Generators can bridge the gap for a little while until they run out of fuel, and fuel has to arrive by ship too. None of this is unique to Hawaii in terms of what could go wrong. Every island in the world faces the same vulnerability. It's just uniquely severe in Hawaii's case because there's genuinely no road out. Governor Green estimated that this storm caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage across the state, and that number was given on Sunday. While helicopter and drone teams were still out assessing damage on the Big Island and Oahu. That estimate is almost certainly going to climb higher. It always does. So here's the big question. 2 disasters. Same week. What actually connects them? Meteorologically, absolutely nothing. There's no shared storm system, no common weather front linking the Midwest to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. One was a stalled line of thunderstorms. The other was a tropical cyclone. Completely separate events. Full stop. But they did their damage in an almost identical way. Neither of these was really a win story. Both of them were water volume stories, and both of them tore straight through benchmarks and safety assumptions that local infrastructure had been built around, in Indiana's case, for more than a century. There's also a really important lesson buried in here about how warning systems function, and why an accurate forecast doesn't automatically translate into a safe outcome. The National Weather Service office in Indianapolis had already upgraded the White River's flood outlook to major severity days before the crest even hit, with warnings that were set to remain active through August 17th. The National Hurricane Center used the phrase life-threatening before Lala even made its closest approach to Hawaii. Hawaiian Electric warned customers ahead of time that extended outages were a real possibility. In both cases, the forecasts were correct. The science worked exactly like it was supposed to. The warnings went out on time, and people still died. Homes still got destroyed. 100,000 people are still sitting without power. That gap between an accurate forecast and an actually safe outcome isn't really a forecasting failure. It's an infrastructure failure. It's a flood map failure. It's a question of where we allow people to build homes and under what conditions. It's about mobile home communities, sitting in floodplains with zero elevation, buffer, and no vehicle for residents to evacuate in. It's about a Category 1 hurricane rating that only measures sustained wind speed and tells you almost nothing about a rain rate of 5 inches an hour crashing down steep volcanic slopes straight into a coastal town. And that's actually a huge blind spot most people don't think about. The category scale for hurricanes measures exactly one thing: sustained wind speed. Category 1 covers 74 to 95 miles an hour. That's it. That's all it tells you. It told the public almost nothing useful about the actual hazard that ended up killing someone and wrecking dozens of homes in Hawaii, which was extreme rainfall hitting steep volcanic terrain that forces moist air rapidly upward and wrings it out, producing rainfall rates far beyond what that same storm would ever produce over flat land or open ocean. A Category 1 storm that technically never even made landfall did all of that. The category wasn't wrong. It was just measuring the wrong variable entirely. And in Indiana, a severe thunderstorm warning is about as routine as weather alerts get. In the Midwest, people who've lived there their whole lives have heard that same alert hundreds of times without a second thought. And this time, a stalled line of completely ordinary-sounding thunderstorms took down the single most famous flood record in the state's history. In both cases, the public-facing warning label basically communicated the opposite of how dangerous the actual threat really was. There's one more thing worth clearing up before we wrap this up, because it trips people up constantly. A 100-year flood does not mean a flood that happens once every 100 years. That's a common and honestly pretty dangerous misunderstanding. What it actually means is a flood that has a 1% chance of being matched or exceeded in any single given year, which means, statistically, 200-year floods could technically happen in back-to-back years without anything being mathematically broken, but that 1% figure is calculated using historical data from river gauges, and that calculation assumes the past is still a reliable guide to the future. Every floodplain map, every levee height, every drainage pipe size, every flood insurance rate, and a huge chunk of local building codes in Indiana are all sitting downstream of that one assumption. And when a record that held firm for 113 years gets broken by a mechanism that's actually weaker than the one that set the original record, rainfall alone beating out rainfall combined with melting snow, well, was not that underlying assumption is exactly what's being put to the test right now. So where do things actually stand today as of August 18th? In Indiana, floodwaters along the White River are finally receding, but the damage assessment work is just getting started. Officials in Hamilton County said the water was finally heading back down as of Sunday morning, but recovery efforts along that river corridor are still fully active. The death toll sits at 7 confirmed, and officials say it could still shift as more water recedes and search operations continue. The joint damage assessments that will determine whether Indiana gets upgraded from an emergency declaration to a full major disaster declaration are currently underway. That's the next real milestone worth watching, once that dollar figure comes back. Right now, $5 million is the number on the table, against a flood that just broke a 113-year-old record straight through the second biggest metro corridor in the entire state. And the storm system hasn't finished moving either. It's already pushed east into Ohio, and it's not done yet. Over in Hawaii, roughly 117,000 customers were still without power as of Monday morning. Repair crews managed to fix 3 major transmission lines on Sunday, which is one of the first real steps toward rebuilding the backbone of the grid. About 100 mainland crew members are expected to arrive Tuesday to start work on Wednesday. Helicopter and drone damage assessments are continuing across the Big Island and Oahu. More than 100 homes have been damaged or destroyed. 6 bridges are destroyed or nearly destroyed in the Cal region. The highway collapse that cut off hospital access is still unresolved. All schools and government offices remained closed Monday. The governor's damage estimate, hundreds of millions of dollars, is expected to rise once the full picture comes in. For context, Now, the last time an actual hurricane made landfall in Hawaii was back in 1992, when Hurricane Iniki, a Category 4 storm, struck Kauai, killed 7 people, and caused about $3.1 billion in damage. That was nearly 34 years ago. Most people currently living on the Big Island have never lived through a hurricane in their lifetime. Preparedness fades fast over a gap that long, and Lala tested that gap without even officially making landfall. Both of these disasters are still unfolding right now. Both recovery timelines are going to be measured in weeks, not days. Both of them tore through numbers that were supposed to hold firm. Century-old flood records, hurricane category scales, and every assumption people built into how they read those numbers. And in both places, the people who actually live there are waking up to a world where the old numbers simply don't apply anymore. Where the benchmark they built their entire lives around, the line where the water was always supposed to stop, turned out to be wrong. This weekend, the United States was fighting 2 federal-scale disasters at the exact same time. 7 people dead in Indiana, 1 person dead in Hawaii, 100,000 people sitting without power, dozens of homes simply gone, an 18-year-old who was supposed to start college in a matter of weeks, a 4-year-old boy who never got the chance to grow up, a county commissioner whose entire definition of a good morning came down to it not raining anymore. Neither one of these stories is over. The water is dropping in Indiana. The lights are slowly coming back on in parts of Hawaii, but the real reckoning is only just beginning. The damage assessments, the insurance disputes, the arguments over flood maps and building codes and what gets rebuilt and on what terms, those conversations are going to drag on for years. The infrastructure decisions that come out of all this are going to shape the next several decades, and these broken records are either going to get written into the new floodplains, the new design standards, or the new safety maps, or they're going to get quietly ignored. And somewhere down the line, 30, 50, 70 years from now, somebody is going to stand in front of a camera and tell you that another record just fell. A record that traces all the way back to 2026. The year 2 disasters hit America at exactly the same time. We're going to keep following this one closely. The damage numbers, the recovery totals, whether that death toll moves again, how fast power actually comes back in Hawaii, and whether Indiana ends up getting that upgrade to a major disaster declaration. Stick around, because this story is nowhere near finished.